When it comes to the pandemic, we all know that the United States has been one of the worst countries to keep its citizens healthy and safe. This is, of course, because of the incompetence, and I would argue I don't even know if it's incompetence. It's really just the neoliberal plan for our country. In order to understand that mess we're in, we have to actually take a look at the neoliberal agenda that has this death grip on our public health care system and our economy. Professor Richard Wolff is here to discuss. Richard Wolff, Marxian economist, author, and host of Economic Update with Richard Wolff, which is syndicated on radio nationwide. The new book, which I am holding in my very hot little hands, is The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. It's available now, so get out there. You don't want to miss this. It's so important for context. Professor Wolff, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Julianna. Really, I enjoy these conversations very much.
Me too. Thank you so much. Can you give viewers in a nutshell, the nutshell of neoliberal, the agenda there, and how it has failed to address the coronavirus pandemics?
Sure. First, the word neoliberal, because it confuses a lot of people, and they're right to be confused. It's a strange use of language. In the United States, liberal has always meant sort of left of center, more or less. But the word liberal was important in politics in England before it ever came to the United States. And the confusing part is in England, it means pretty much the opposite. It means right of center. The word liberal has always meant in economic language and in political language in England, somebody who believes that the economy is best left to itself, that the government and political concerns should be kept away from the government. The first way it was articulated was around a French phrase called laissez-faire, which means let it be. The government's attitude to the economy should be let it be. The flip side of this view is that capitalism is such a wonderful system that leave it alone. Don't try to improve it. Don't try to regulate it. Don't try to make it work for people. It's best left alone. It will be the best for everybody if you just don't interfere with it. In modern times, this is associated with a resurgence of this old liberal idea with Margaret Thatcher in England and with Ronald Reagan here in the United States. So roughly around 1980, we have a change in the view. Before that, we had the view that we need the government. After the great crash of the 1930s, the government was seen as making the economy work better. If you left it to capitalism, well, they crashed in 1929, and nobody wanted that again. This lasted roughly from the 1930s to the 1970s, and then that policy was overthrown. That's what it meant that Thatcher became the prime minister in England and Ronald Reagan the president here. And it was then the view that the opposite was the truth, that the government was not what came in and saved capitalism from itself, but the reverse, that the best way to have economic prosperity and growth was to get the government out of running the economy, shaping the economy, regulating the economy, taxing people. All of that was bad, we were told. And if you got the government out, well, then the economy would soar and we'd all be in great shape. And the neoliberal agenda, as you rightly call it, was the policies pushed very hard by the Republican Party here in the United States since the 1970s, if not sooner. But it also won over a disconcerting amount of the Democratic Party that went along with it. In the 80s, 90s, the early years of this century, politicians on both sides of the aisle felt they had to go along with this. Part of it was also globalization, the idea that if private capitalists wanted to go to another country, we should be all for it because that's a private profit decision and that's the way we want the economy to go. So even as we watched in the 80s, 90s, huge numbers of jobs leave the United States because capitalist employers found it profitable to move to China or India or Brazil. Nobody was allowed to make a criticism. That was one of the ways Mr. Trump surprised everybody. including himself, by getting elected because he stood up and said, no, this isn't right. I'm going to do something else. Now, he isn't strong enough. He couldn't, and he hasn't. But the idea that he might made a lot of people feel that he's more interested in our actual suffering than the people who are gung-ho cheerleaders for neoliberalism.
Professor Wolff, the question I have is that, these private enterprises, basically it's the drowning of the government in the bathtub. That's what they say all the time.
Right. That's what they say.
I put a little tweet out today that was like, well, they're all drowning now in their own COVID-related lung infections. This is kind of scary to even have no government, even though the government we have is it's terrifying. Are private enterprises just waiting for, what are the response, the neoliberal response to the pandemic? How has it failed to address the pandemic?
Well, I think there are two ways to get at this. The first one is to see that if you have a private profit-driven capitalism, which we do, then what you get are the results of what capitalists calculate is profitable for them to do and not to do. So let's start with something as simple as a mask. Okay, we know enough about viruses. We've had them in this country. Virus has been a part of human life from the beginning for thousands of years. We know that viruses periodically hurt people, and you have to be ready. And viruses are very often spread by, our mouths and our breathing and all of that. And so masks are something you need. Okay, we have factories in America that can make masks. We have companies that can make masks. But the reality is they didn't do it. We didn't have hundreds of millions of masks stored around the country where people are and need them. We didn't. Why not? Because it wasn't profitable. And that's the way our system works.
I just spent $25 on two child's masks. How was it not profitable? Is the question I have.
It's not profitable because if you're a private company, and imagine now the virus hasn't come yet, you're a private company. You have to make the masks, and then you have to store the masks in a warehouse. And you have to have warehouses all over the country where the populations are, our cities, our most populated states, et cetera, and then in the rural areas as well. And they have to sit in this warehouse. And when you sit in a warehouse, things can get dirty and they would have to be cleaned, and things can wear out and they'd have to be replaced, and you'd have to monitor it, and you'd have to make sure they're secure. This is very expensive. And when would you sell the mask? The answer is you might have to wait 10, 20 years until the next virus. That's too risky. That's not profitable. That the costs there overwhelm what you could likely sell the mask for. So the private capitalist system didn't produce an adequate number of masks or gloves or ventilators or ICU units in hospitals or hospital bed. You get the picture? It wasn't profitable. From which you have to, unless you're crazy, draw the logical conclusion that if public health is an important issue, and I don't know of a human society where it isn't. So if public health is an important issue, capitalism isn't the way to get it, because capitalism isn't going to produce those things because it isn't profitable to produce them and store them and all the rest of it. So what has to happen? If you're honest, the government has to come in and say, we have to compensate for the failure of private capitalist enterprises to do what we know our public health requires. And then the government, here's what it does. It comes in. It says to the mask company, we, the government, will buy the masks as fast as they come off the assembly line. And we'll give you a very nice price that will allow you to earn a very nice profit. And all the risk of storing it and locating it and cleaning it and replace it, the government, the taxpayer, we will pick it up. That's what the government could do if it were honest. But in our society, where we are neoliberally crazy, we're not allowed to say that capitalism failed and the government is coming in to compensate.
But the government does do this with machines of war, right? They continue to stockpile machines of war that aren't being used, and then they go make a war.
Exactly that. And I love to use that example because it shows that the government knows exactly what it would need to do, because it's not profitable for companies to make missiles or planes or tanks or guns or any of the paraphernalia of war for the same reason. You have to produce them, then you have to stick them in a warehouse somewhere, then you have to monitor and clean them and repair them and and that doesn't pay for the same reason. You may have to do it for years till the next war comes along. So what does the government do? Exactly what I just said it didn't do for public health. It buys the missiles as fast as they come off the assembly line, and then at government expense, it stores it and monitors and cleans it and all the rest. Why does this happen? Because the defense producers have worked out a very cozy relationship with the government. It's called the military-industrial complex. The government comes in and buys whatever those fellows produce. They make their money. They make their fat profits. The government keeps revolutionizing more modern and faster airplanes and all the rest. So it's an endless replacement of the old munitions with new munitions. Wonderful setup. We all pay for it. Well, then the question would be, why doesn't the same thing happen with medical? Why? And the answer is, it's wonderful. It's capitalism again, because the medical profession worked a different kind of deal. And the deal for the medical profession is to keep the government out of their business, whereas with the defense producers, the government was right in their business. The medical, we all know, because that's what the Obamacare and all the rest is about. The doctors, the hospitals, the drug and device makers, and the health insurance companies, they don't want the government anywhere near them because they've got the biggest scam going in the Western world. The United States spends 18% of our GDP on healthcare. No other country in the world does that. Countries with much better health statistics, they live longer than us, they go to the hospital less often, babies that are born have a better chance of making it to the end of the first year and the fifth year, better outcomes at way less money than we get. So they don't, the medical people, they don't want the government anywhere near them. So the government can't come in and do in medical what it does in military. And so we're all stuck with a country unprepared to deal with this virus. Here's a statistic that dwarfs everything else. The United States has 4.5% of the world's people and 25% of the world's COVID cases and COVID deaths.
Okay, so that actually gets to a point here. We've got 7 million, I think, at this point, or somewhere between 7 and 8 million cases. Pretty much all cases require some kind of treatment, whether it's hospitalization or just buying, some drugs to make you feel better, at home. Are private enterprises just waiting for it to get worse so that the demand for PPE and products will get higher? There's a cost, how much is the cost of the sickness? How many people have to die before private enterprises say, oh, this is profitable, let's get in on this?
Well, I can give you an example of what some private profit-driven enterprises have done. The Centers for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, they have been sending out more and more warnings. And I'll give you an example, and this is important for your audience to know. There are dozens, that's what they tell us, dozens of toxic hand sanitizers being sold in stores across the United States. Here's a chance for a quick buck. People are scared, they're desperate. They stop in the store and there's on the display case hand sanitizer claiming this will keep you safe from the dread virus. In this hand sanitizer, one of the items used to make them, methanol, and the FDA particularly points out that methadol is very dangerous and that, according to them, 17 Americans have already died from using the toxic hand sanitizer. That was just released this last week. It's an awful example that the profit motive, which we are supposed to celebrate in neoliberal dogma, is as often the cause of horrific outcomes, like being unprepared for this virus, and now hurting ourselves as profit-driven capitalists rush to the market things like toxic hand sanitizers. Right. And even with the FDA finding out about it, it's a whole nother matter lasting months to identify those companies, to stop them from making it, to drag back the product already distributed to the stores. This is an awful, chaotic mess of a system that simply isn't working.
We're speaking with Professor Richard Wolff, author of the new book, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Out now. You can go to Democracy at Work in order to get yourself or your family members a copy. The holidays are coming up. You're watching ACT.TV. Please subscribe if you like this kind of talk. Professor Wolff, let's just turning a little bit here. How has neoliberalism failed to address the economic fallout that we're now living through because of the pandemic?
Well, again, the best way to get this across is to give you an example. In almost all the countries of Europe, and certainly in all the major ones like Germany and France and Britain and Italy and Spain, they reacted to the virus and to the global crash of capitalism in a very different way from the United States. They said that they want all the resources of their society, public and private, to be mobilized in a coordinated way to fight this danger, both the viral danger and the economic danger. And one of the decisions they all made, very important, was a decision that the government should help businesses, but on one fundamental condition. The government will help the businesses, and the businesses will not fire their workers. Let me stress that. The rate of unemployment in Italy today is less than it was a year ago. That is, the great pandemic, which hurt Italy, was not allowed to worsen their unemployment. In fact, the opposite. In March, when the pandemic hit, unemployment in Germany was 5%. Today it's 6%. They did not allow what? Neither of those countries, none of them, allowed to have happen what happened here. We have had over 50 million Americans, a third of our workforce, has had to go file unemployment compensation documents to get covered. Some for a few weeks, some for months, having to be covered. What this does is unspeakably cruel and stupid. First, cruel. Not only do you run the risk of getting sick with this pandemic, and you now run the risk of losing your income, but now we have a new one. You don't have a job. You're unemployed. You don't know whether that job you had will be there when this is over, or even if it is there, under what conditions. You've added a whole new layer of anxiety and uncertainty to the lives of people already pressed by a pandemic and by an economy that's in shambles. Unspeakable cruelty. You didn't have that in Europe. The government said, we will help you, the business, pay your payroll. You keep your workers working. You don't fire. You don't have 50 million unemployed. And you know why they didn't have it in Europe? There's a real lesson for us. They didn't have it in Europe, and they didn't have it from conservative governments, and they didn't have it from left-wing governments. And they have both in Europe, but neither of them did this. And the reason is they all know what would have happened if they had fired 50 million. Those millions of people would have not gone to work. They would have gone into the streets, and those economies would have come to a dead stop.
Because no deliveries, no trucks in and
Nothing.
out, no
Nothing.
food, nobody showing up to
Right.
work their stock exchange, nothing.
That's right. Nothing. And you think a virus hurts the economy, it's got nothing on the mass of people saying no. And that could threaten the whole economic system. And they don't go there. They don't do it. It's out of the question.
Professor
In
Wolff,
the United States, the labor movement and the left are relatively weaker than in Europe. And so a government could get rid of it. Not only did the government do it, but, and this has to be said, the labor movement, where is the AFL-CIO? Where are the mass demonstrations saying to the government, you can find solutions, that's your job, but you can't find solutions for your failure to prepare for a virus and make the solution throwing 50 million people out of work. I mean, it's beyond tolerability.
Professor Wolff, didn't our government give a bunch of money to like the airline industry and all of that? Was that with no caveat that they would not fire their workers? Because now they're fired. Now my understanding is they're having a big fight about firing them, and Sarah Nelson is working hard to make that not happen. So our government gave the money to the corporations, but without the caveat.
Well, basically, a little bit of both. Most workers were just not covered by any caveat, by any agreement. Their employer got money, got to see them through the hard times, and the workers were laid off.
So basically, that money went to paying the rent.
That's right.
So it was a money laundering scheme right to the banks.
Right to the banks had to pay their rent. The businesses had to pay off the loans that they had taken out. They could keep on a skeleton staff. They could pay their executives. Many of them continued to pay out dividends. I mean, the most amazing thing was allowed. But there were a few examples, and that's why I think people are confused. There were a few cases where there was a quid pro quo, and the airlines was one of those. Money given to the airlines, which was huge. And remember, this was money given to airlines who had not done a really good job recently, as you know, with the 737 and the crashes and everything. So there was a lot of question. My God, why are we bailing out an industry that failed us? But in any case, they got it. They got about $25 billion, and it did have a caveat. You have to agree not to lay anybody off. I believe it was until September 1st or September 31st. Which is why you didn't have the layoffs in the airline industry. But it was unusual in this country, whereas it was universal in Europe.
But because they have a union. Is that right?
They have a union.
What kind of leverage do people have if they don't have a job? If there's very few jobs available and you're in the union, what kind of leverage does a union have at this point when they're basically just firing everyone?
Not very much. And the hope that they might have, the leverage they might have, they are blocked by ideology from using. Their leverage is the degree of suffering in this country. If the labor movement were to come out of its, I'm trying to be polite here, hibernation and become an active force, they would become the leader of the mass of people the way they once were back in the 30s when they did that kind of thing.
So a general strike is basically what we need, because we would need workers who are still employed to stand up and say, I'm not going in unless these people also get paid. And
not working people, the families, the people who do home care, the people who take care of the elderly, the people in all the industries that are not unionized, they should be appealed to because they're being hurt in this situation even worse than the union members. But if the union members, who are relatively less hurt than the non-union members, were to take the leadership, then they would see what we saw in the 1930s when the unions did step up and suddenly millions of people joined unions. It was the greatest unionization drive in American history. We never had anything like it before, and we've never had anything like it since. But we're now in a depression-like situation, and the unions, instead of stepping up the way they did in the 1930s, are like mouse, or like, church mice. You don't hear them, you don't see them. It is amazing, and I can assure you.
They just kind of are like, can we get a little bit better insurance to their own employer as opposed to fighting, the big fight.
And I suspect they are very upset that many of their members are interested in Trump. They may not like it, they may not want it, but it is the case. And the Democrats have to accept responsibility for a good part of this.
Yeah, because they took a lot of corporate money.
They went on vacation. They went to look for the big bucks from the big corporate donors, and they gave up their role, which they once had as the kind of leader of those from the bottom, the working class, and all of that. And that left an awful lot of workers who used to be, or their parents used to be, active union, Democratic Party stalwarts, feeling betrayed. There's no nice way to say this. And voting for Trump, not because they believe in the theatrics that guy puts out, but almost as a statement of their anger and bitterness that they were forgotten, that the Republicans and the Democrats just sold them down the river, that their incomes are shrinking, their job opportunities are shrinking. They're angry. And it's a shame that it gets shunted over into issues of white supremacy and all of that, because that's not where it really comes from. The white supremacy has always been used to siphon off the anger of the white working class, to be angry at other workers with different skin color rather than at the system and the bosses that are their real problem.
So basically, this neoliberal ideology says we can give you this money, airlines and other industries, but there will be no regulations. Lack of regulations on corporations is one of the basic tenets, right, of neoliberalism.
Let's remember, when you hear that the government is bailing out businesses, here's what it means in real English. The government is giving the board of directors of a corporation a lot of money. It is now that board of directors, usually 10, 15 people, who will decide what to do with that money. You're not giving it to the 10,000 employees of that company who have exactly nothing to say about where the tax money that they help to send to the government, what is going to be done with it. Oh, no, in capitalism, the decision is made. So they can decide, we'll fire 10,000 workers. Meanwhile, we'll keep us, the CEO and the CFO and the CIO and all of them. We're going to keep us in a very nice desk with a very nice chauffeured car, with a very nice pay package. And we needed to be there for the interim, but we don't need 20 secretaries and we don't need 50 workers. It's very, very undemocratic. The politicians are giving money to the employers. If you put all the employers together, it's not 3% of the American people. The vast majority of us are employees. An honest democratic system would help us, because we're the majority, and give us the say, how do we best use this money? But we don't do that. We give it to the same corporate leaders whose decisions got us into this mess, as if they were the best people to get us out. Once you think about it, it does not make it. This is the behavior of a system in deep doo-doo.
What are the most effective and executable things an administration could do to put the brakes on the economic fallout from the pandemic? And are other countries doing these?
Yes. I'll give you an example.
If Biden puts you on his administration, what are you going to tell him to do is what I want to know here. Well,
my first response is do not wager much money on such an outcome. You will lose the money. Okay. Here's what the first and easiest thing that comes to mind. If you're going to fire over 50 million people, which we've done, with, depending on how you count, 20 to 30 million people unemployed as we speak now, that is craziness. If you're giving them a little extra money, that's nice for them, but it's still crazy. Why? Because what those people want and need is a regular job that is secure and that pays a proper income. And that's what we need as a society too. Imagine what we could do If we took the 20 million, and that's a lowball estimate, the 20 million of unemployed today, and we said now what was said in the 1930s in this country, we will immediately give you a governmental job.
How about the Green New Deal? We've got that right. That's right there.
We can all tick it off. First thing, test everybody in America. Do what other countries have done that are managing this crisis better. Train 1 million of those people to go out and test the other 300 million in this country on a continuing basis, so we know where the disease is, who needs to be treated, who can safely go where. I mean,
what a great idea. That's such an immediate thing that we could do on January 21st. A million jobs all of a sudden.
Right. The people doing the testing would have a good job. The people being tested would have a worry taken off of their mind. I mean, and then the next thing is reconfigure the schools. The biggest problem right now is the schools. Okay, every movie theater is a potential classroom. The movie theater is sitting there empty now for 6 months.
Going out of business. Regal just was,
right. So those auditoriums should have been available so students could be placed, a good 6 or 7 feet from one another. You could have some of these unemployed people be the monitors to make sure that come on, we know what has to be done. Then there's the Green New Deal. Then there's taking care of the old people, whom we are now crowding into the nursing homes of this country where they are dying like flies from this disease. I mean, I don't want to be mean-spirited, but for those folks who take seriously Judeo-Christian, Muslim, or any other religious traditions that emphasize ethics, how do you look at yourself in the morning, allowing yourself to be part of a society that is so cold and indifferent to what could be changed if you only gave those unemployed people the money? Look, we're giving 3/4 of that money to them without working. Give them another quarter, which they want, and get back from them all that their brains and muscles and creativity can allow them to give.
They also want.
Yes.
People don't want to sit home. They want to get out.
Absolutely. So everybody wants it, but somehow the way our system works, it's not doing what we can all see ought to be done. That's when you say goodbye to an economic system. So it's like having a refrigerator that for the umpteenth time has conked out on you just as people were arriving for the dinner party that you had set up, right? Your worst nightmare. That's what we have. We have an economic system like the busted refrigerator. And if you call the repair guy, he'll come to your house and he'll say, it'll be another $200. But I'm telling you, lady, don't do it. Because it's time to get it's time to get a new economic system.
Professor Wolff, you gave us one thing that we could do immediately would be a jobs program. That's one of the first things. Any other things that other countries are doing or that you think would be, because we want to be able to pressure, hopefully, our new president to do something like these things. So we need to know what these things are. So if you have other ideas, we would love to hear them.
Yes. One of the things that captures the creativity of the unemployed around the world has been taken care of in many countries and could be done here. I'm going to use the example from Italy, which in many ways is the most advanced in this area. Back in 1985, they passed a law in Italy that had a remarkable quality. Here's the law. If you become unemployed in Italy, by the way, it's still the law in Italy, that's why it's important. If you become unemployed in Italy for any reason, you have two choices. Number one, you can get a weekly unemployment check, like we do here in the United States. But you have a second option. You can choose if you have at least 9 other unemployed people making the same choice with you. The government will give you the full year or 2 worth of unemployment payments right now as a lump sum to each of the 10 of you, minimum 10, on one condition. You use that money to start and operate a worker cooperative business. The idea of the government is that's a way better way for you to use the next year than to pick up a check once a week.
How many of these are there out there? Like this is very exciting to me. There's
a whole bunch. It really is. It's right now, it's a senior.
I mean, it's a way to, it's okay. It's a way to stabilize the economy, right? To have people
Absolutely.
who own.
And unemployed people are now told, you have your fate in your hands. You have a bunch of money. There's a group of you. If you fail, you can't come back and collect unemployment because you've already gotten it. But we want you to develop a worker co-op sector of the Italian economy. So the people of Italy have a real free choice. They can choose between working in a worker co-op or a regular top-down capitalist enterprise. They can shop from one, they can shop from the other. You give people the choice of what kind of economic system they want. We don't have that in the United States because we don't have a sector like that. And if you want to see how powerful it can become, the best place to go in Italy is the province of Emilia-Romagna, around Bologna in the north. That economy, that regional economy, had 40% of all businesses in Emilia-Romagna are worker co-ops. And they fight for it. They've had it that way for decades.
Doesn't that come up? They had a strong union organization there, right? Because and they fought for it because they had a lot of
and
factories and people being treated terribly.
In Italy, the unions took the lead. The union said, we want this. We think it would be even better for workers if they had not an adversarial relationship with an employer, the way capitalism works, but rather the workers themselves ran the enterprise. They would take much better care of themselves than any employer would ever do. And so it was logical for the unions to be allied with the worker co-ops. By the way, in America,
in that system, wouldn't it force people in capitalistic endeavors to be better to their workers so that workers would also choose to work there?
Exactly. It would force that kind of competitiveness. And, in the 19th century in the United States, workers, co-ops, and unions worked together, too, because they're logical allies. That alliance has been broken in the United States during the Cold War, like so many things that were progressive were undone. But that's not a reason why they can't be renewed. They can't be revived. You can't look at examples like Italy and not learn from them, which we ought to be doing.
What if Biden does this? Could he do this by, stroke of a pen, executive order?
Absolutely. He could do that. By the way, here's something I learned a few years ago. In a number of states, worker co-ops were so popular in the 19th century that laws were put on the books, which are still on the books, giving special preferences to worker co-ops to help them get going, a tax holiday, better tax treatment. So yes, the laws are already in place to allow worker co-ops. What we need is for folks to understand that is the new direction out of the mess that capitalism has made. That is a better system. You're going to get better results if you let the people, look, let me give it to you as a slogan. If you want the economy to serve the people, you got to put the people in charge. We don't do that. We put a tiny group of employers in charge, and then we seem to be amazed that they run the businesses of this country for themselves and not for us. Right. Solution, get rid of them and run it ourselves.
So this is good. These are two things that a new administration or any administration who'd be amenable to this could do. Jobs program right off the bat.
Right.
That could also be a jobs program focused on testing and helping out to ease the coronavirus. Worker co-ops by the stroke of a pen could be supported and created, etc. Any other thing you would suggest? Just giving Biden something to do in January.
Yeah, there would be two. One would be that all of those Green New Deals, the infrastructure, the need to deal with the mess we've made of our environment, give these unemployed people the kind of work. By the way, some of the first environmental programs ever done in the United States were done by something called the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. That was unemployed people hired, given a federal job, to start clearing swamps and redirecting rivers so that we could preserve the water, et cetera, et cetera. So we know how to do all of this. Just get to work and do it. And then there are a couple other things. We have industries that we allow to be governed by the profit motive that we shouldn't. Healthcare is one and food is another. We ought to change the system. Food the food we put into our bodies every day is simply too important a part of public health to be allowed to be governed by profit. We are the world's worst obesity country. We have the worst diabetes, the worst high blood pressure. And we know that a major part of that is the diet. And yet we continue to allow profit makers to flood the economy with sugar, fat, and salt in absurd quantities where we lead the world again. I mean, this should be changed. And the government is the logical place to produce a proper food system. And by that, I mean not just healthier, but we are now having basically a two-class system. If you have the money, you go and you buy organic and you pay a pretty penny for it. And if you can't afford it, if you're one of the mass of the people, you go back to your normal supermarket wondering what pesticides, herbicides, chemicals are in the food you eat. This is outrageous that we are doing this. If organic food is better for you, it should be the diet, basically, or at least available to everybody, not according to how much money you have, but in the same way that we make a public park available to everybody, or a water fountain in that park is available to everybody, and we can safely drink from it because we know it has been treated properly, blah, blah, blah. These are things that an employed, unemployed, federal job program could do these things and transform this country for all of us in ways that would make life here much, much better.
Professor Wolff, I would like to get your comments and then move into our quick talk about the debate tonight. Your thoughts about the fact that President Trump sends out a tweet saying we're not going to help the people until after the election. And also, we're not going to help the corporations until after the election. And the stock market dives 600 points. Your thoughts, I'm just going to open it up. Your thoughts about the system that we're in that allows such instability.
Okay, but I realize I have another engagement that I had at 11 o'clock. My apologies.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's my fault. I should have clarified that. But let me quickly.
Well, we've had a lot to talk about today, but yes, go ahead.
And we can do it again soon. Very quickly. It is outrageous. It is outrageous. He's holding hostage what millions of people need desperately for an election advantage. It's awful. It's just unspeakably awful. He doesn't want to fund the cities and towns of America. That's why he's playing these games. And he believes in this kind of political hardball. If you starve the cities and towns, it'll destroy the American economy. It's a short-run policy, but I think he realizes short-run is the only one for him at this point. He's got to get that election, or else nothing else is possible.
Professor Richard Wolff, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get to those final questions, but we will do it the next time. The sickness is the system when capitalism fails to save us from pandemics or itself. The questions will be answered in this book. So I encourage everyone to go to Democracy at Work and get it. Thank you so much, Professor Wolff. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Juliana. Until the next time.
You're watching ACT TV. If you are watching us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe, hit like. I'm sad that we didn't get to those last questions, but we did get a lot of stuff out on the table, I guess. Some of the questions that I had for Professor Wolff were in the vice presidential debate tonight. What words are we listening for when they're talking about neoliberalism? I understand it's trickle down, austerity, balanced budget. I'm sure there are others. And what are the opposite words we can listen for? Just any kind of buzzwords to talk about the opposite of neoliberal policies. I understand it's, grassroots up. It would be jobs program. It would obviously be worker co-ops, which I doubt we're going to hear anything about tonight. But you never know. Thank you so much for watching again. I'm Julianna Forlano. You can follow me personally on Twitter. I'll be tweeting the debate tonight. You can also follow. Tomorrow we have Josh Holland and James from the internet, James from ACT TV, coming on the program to do a debate takedown. Hopefully it'll be equally as entertaining as the last one was, but for different reasons. Follow ACT TV across platforms. Thanks for watching. We are out of here for today. Have a good one.